Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible class. Can you join me in 1 Corinthians chapter 7? We're talking saints under construction. We're using Paul's first letter to the saints in Corinth, and we have been learning valuable lessons. As we build, our faith must rest in the power of God. As we build, there must be no divisions among us. As we build, we must not go beyond what is written. As we build, the church must be kept pure. As we build, we must learn to get along. In our last study from the second half of 1 Corinthians 6, as we build, we must use our bodies to glorify God. I'm going to tell you from the very beginning, there's some challenging stuff in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. But over the next few minutes, I'll give you some things to highlight, some key words or phrases. Do you have your highlighter ready? Then we'll turn it over to your teacher for some in-class discussion. It's a longer chapter, so we're not going to read every verse on the video, but I want to try and give you some framework to set you up for good discussion. Here's the big idea from the heart of 1 Corinthians 7. As we build, we must lead the lives that the Lord has assigned. Notice there in 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 17, only let each person, let's highlight, lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him. We've been hearing a lot about respect for the Lord, right? Lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. Paul says, this is my rule in all the churches. Was anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of his call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision. For neither circumcision counts for anything nor uncircumcision, but keeping the commandments of God. Each one should remain in the condition in which he was called. Why do you think that's even something that Paul felt the need to write about? We'll dig around in that principle over the course of the next few minutes. For now, let me show you some various examples of what he's talking about. Right here in verse 21, where let's highlight a bondservant. That helps us easily go back and see what Paul said to bondservants. Don't be concerned about it. If you can gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. For he who was called in the Lord, someone who's obeyed the gospel as a bondservant, is a freedman of the Lord. Listen, the most important thing about a new Christian who was a bondservant is not the fact that he was a bondservant, but that now he's in the Lord. Likewise, he who is free when called is a bondservant of Christ. The most important thing about me is not that I am free, but that I am a servant of Christ. You were bought with a price. Do not become bondservants of men. So, brothers, in whatever condition each was called, let's highlight, there let him remain with God. And Paul is going to give us a variety of ways to help us think through what's it mean to be a bondservant of Christ, whatever the circumstances of my life, what's it going to look like to remain faithful to God no matter what is going on around me. Now, there are a couple of key phrases in this chapter that help us get into the frame of mind and appreciate maybe a little more what was going on in Corinth. Notice in verse 26, I think that in view of, let's highlight, the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. In verse 29, this is what I mean, brothers, the appointed time, let's highlight this, the appointed time has grown very short. Or in verse 31, the present form of this world is passing away. what exactly was going on in Corinth to make Paul write these sorts of things? That might be a challenging question, but we'll see if as a class we can't dig a little deeper into that. In verse 35, whatever the case, whatever is going on, notice, I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote, let's highlight, good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. What does God want to see in us as individual saints and as a congregation of God's people? Well, we need to be in good order, and we need to be undividedly loyal to the Lord. And it doesn't matter if we're young or old, married or single. Paul is going to show us that in this chapter. So again, we're not going to read all of these verses, but just for ease of reference in our discussion, let's go back to verse 1 and notice how the chapter begins. Now concerning, let's highlight the matters about which you wrote. There are questions in Corinth about how disciples ought to live. There are very new believers in Corinth. And so what about if I'm in this situation or that situation? Well, that is exactly what Paul is talking about. They had written about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But Paul says, because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. That really does go back to the very beginning, right? God's intention of one man and one woman for life. In verse 6, we can see that he begins giving some instructions. For now, let's highlight verse 8 to the married and the widows. There are some instructions about what the unmarried and the widows, how they ought to live. We might dig a little deeper into that. In verse 10, to the married I give this charge. Not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife. Remember, one man, one woman for life. In verse 12, to the rest I say, I, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he shouldn't divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. Remember, one man, one woman for life. In verse 25, we see him talking about the betrothed, those who plan to get married. What I want you to see is whatever the situation, I can serve God, I ought to honor God, I need to be undivided in my loyalty first and foremost to God. Notice here with me in verse 39, a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives. Let's highlight that as a foundational principle to understand in marriage. If a husband dies, she's free to be married to whom she wishes only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is. And I think Paul says that I too have the Spirit of Christ. It's a challenging chapter, but the big idea is, as we build, we must lead the lives that the Lord has assigned. I can walk with the Lord whether I'm single or married, young or old, male or female. And 1 Corinthians 7 gets us thinking about how to apply that to everyday life. So let's dig in. Thanks so much for being in class. Hope you have a great rest of your class and a great start to this new week.